My dear students and viewers, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my online class once again. I am Murshida Imam, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Govt Shahid, Suhrawardy College, Dhaka. Today I am here for the students of Honours 4th year, Department of English. My dear students, how are you? Hope you are fine and doing your online classes regularly. My dear students, you know, in our previous class, we learned about the life and works of D.H. Lawrence and also about his novel Sons and Lovers. And today, as per our declaration of the previous class, we will learn about the characters of the novel Sons and Lovers. We learn about the major characters and also about the minor characters of the novel at first. At first, I will talk about the major characters of the novel. And you know, characters are very important for you because you have to attain question on characters, that is write short notes on every character you may be asked, okay, or you have to attain broad question on character, that is in this way, that is Mrs. Morel is a tragic character, discuss, okay, or analyze the character of dash, okay. In this way you have to attend the answer. So you have to be more careful and sincere about the characters of any writings, okay. And in the novel, characters are more important. So at first I want to talk about major characters, that is in the novel Sons and Lovers. Major characters are Walter Morel, Mrs. Morel or Gertrude Morel, William Morel, Annie Morel, Paul Morel, Miriam Levers, Clara Doyce and Baxter Doyce, okay. Those are the major characters in the novel. Now I am telling you that is who is who, okay. Walter Morel, he is a coal miner and husband of Gertrude Morel, and Gertrude Morel is the central character of the novel Sons and Lovers. Gertrude Morel is mother of 3 sons and a daughter, that is mother of William Morel, Paul Morel and Arthur Morel, and also she has a daughter that is named Annie Morel. And William Morel, who is he? Yes, he is the first son of the Morel family, that is he is the first son of Walter Morel and Gertrude Morel. Then Annie Morel. Annie Morel is the only daughter of the Morel family, okay. And Paul Morel, yes, he is the protagonist of the novel, and he is the second son of Walter Morel and Gertrude Morel. And Miriam Levers, okay, Miriam Levers is the first girl whom Paul ever loved, okay. And Clara Doyce, she is a married woman but separated from her husband, and she is the second love of Paul Morel. And Baxter Doyce, he is Clara Doyce's husband, that is Clara's husband, and he also works at Thomas Jordan's with Paul Morel. And those are the description of the major characters in short, and we'll learn about those characters in details later, okay. And now I am telling you about the minor characters of the novel. Arthur Morel, the youngest and the last son, last of the Morel children, okay. And then Mrs. Levers, that is Miriam's mother, okay. And then Edgar Levers, he is Miriam's elder brother. Then Thomas Jordan, the owner of the factory where Paul Morel works, okay. And we also find the character Mr. Pappleworth, and he is Paul's boss at Thomas Jordan's. Then Fanny and Polly, those are factory girls of Thomas Jordan's where Paul works. Then we also get a minor character named Lucia Lily, Dennis Western, okay, Agatha Levers, then Beatrice, Leonard, and we get the name of John Field, okay, John Field. And those are the minor characters of the novel. My dear students, you are often asked to the major characters, mention the major characters of the novel or minor characters of the novel, and sometimes you are also asked that is what is the role of the minor characters in the novel. Okay, in this way you have to be prepared. Your dear students, there are a number of themes in the novel Sons and Lovers. At first, the theme of Oedipus complex is to be noted here. Then theme of love and marriage, theme of relationships, then a three-way conflict between body, mind and environment, okay, and theme of nature, that is use of nature, is also to be noted here. And treatment of love and marriage I mentioned earlier. And the students, the novel's center of conflict is said to lie in Paul's divided loyalty to mother and mistresses. And here we see the if I want to say about the significance of the title Sons and Lovers, here sons take the place of lover, okay. So when we'll go through the text or we'll learn about the text, we'll see that Mrs. Morel, that is Gertrude Morel, being unhappy with her husband, okay, and with her conjugal life, he transfers his love to his, or he transfers his full attention to his sons, okay. In this way his sons take the place of her lover. In this way we can interpret the significance of the title Sons and Lovers. My dear students, you know Mrs. Morel or Gertrude Morel is the central women character in the novel, around which all other characters revolve. And you will also see that Miriam is Paul's spiritual mistress and Clara his sexual one. The whole arrangement is carefully planned so that neither is strong enough to affect his mother's ultimate control. That is and after his brother William's death, Paul becomes his mother's favorite and struggles throughout the novel to balance his love for her with his relationships with other women. And if I want to say about the theme of Oedipus complex, that is the complex was defined by Freud, that is Sigmund Freud, as having a deep desire for the opposite sex parent and having a rivalry with the same sex parent. And the complex also means that Walter, that is his father, is jealous of him. And we see that Gertrude's children, that is are simultaneously her sons and her lovers. So the theme of Oedipus complex is to be noted here. And the setting of the novel Sons and Lovers, you know, is Nottinghamshire, a mining town, that is a coalfields of Lawrence's own boyhood, okay. My dear students, now I want to focus on part 1, chapter 1, that is the early married life of the Morels. Here we get a clear idea about the family backgrounds of Mrs. Morel. that is Mrs. Morel or Gertrude Morel, came of a good old burgher family, famous independents who had fought with Colonel Hutchinson and who remained stout Congregationalists. Okay, her grandfather had gone bankrupt in the lace market at a time when so many lace manufacturers were ruined in Nottingham. Her father, George Coppard, was an engineer, a large, handsome, haughty man, proud of his fair skin and blue eyes, but more proud still of his integrity. Gertrude resembled her mother in her small build, okay, but her temper, proud and unyielding, she had from the Coppards. That is, she came from a very aristocratic family. Okay, he was Gertrude Coppard at first. Then after marriage, she became Gertrude Morel. Okay, and Mrs. Morel or Gertrude Morel was the second daughter, and she favored her mother, loved her mother best of all. But she had the Coppard's clear, defiant blue eyes and their broad brow. Okay, she remembered to have hated her father's overbearing manner towards her gentle, humorous, kindly souled mother. When Gertrude Morel or Gertrude Coppard, you may say, that is when she was 19. Okay, when she was 19, she used to walk home from chapel with John Field, and John Field was the son of a well-to-do tradesman, had been to college in London and was to devote himself to business. And here we see that is John Field gave her the Bible, okay, and she still had the Bible that John Field had given her, okay, and we also see John Field taught her that is being a man isn't everything. Being a man isn't everything. And at 20, owing to her health, she had left that place, and her father had returned home to Nottingham, and John Field's father had been ruined. The son had gone as a teacher in Norwood. She did not hear of him until 2 years later. She made determined inquiry, and he had married his landlady, a woman of 40, a widow with property. And still Mrs. Morel preserved John Field's Bible, I mentioned earlier, and she did not now believe him to be well. She understood pretty well what he might or might not have been. So she preserved his Bible and kept his memory intact in her heart for her own sake. To her dying day, for 35 years, she did not speak of him. So you see, John Field is a character who never came in front of us, only described through the dialogue of Gertrude Morel. So you may be called or you may be asked, that is, write a short note on John Field. Okay, you have to prepare yourself in this way, that is, you have to write down a short note on John Field. It's a minor character, you know, I mentioned earlier. And my dear students, we'll see that when Gertrude was 23 years old, she met at a Christmas party she met at a Christmas party a young man from the Arwash Valley, Morel. Okay, Morel was then 27 years old. So when Gertrude met Mr. Morel, Mr. Morel was 27 years old and Gertrude was 23 years old. Okay, and he was well set up. That is, Morel was then well set up, erect and very smart. He had wavy black hair that shone again and a vigorous black beard that had never been shaved. His cheeks were ruddy and his red, moist mouth was noticeable because he laughed so often and so heartily. He had that rare thing, a rich, ringing laugh. Gertrude Coppard had watched him fascinated. Uh, he was so full of color and animation. His voice ran so easily into comic grotesque. He was so ready and so pleasant with everybody. Her own father had a rich fund of humor, but it was satiric. Okay, this man's was different, soft, non-intellectual, warm, a kind of gambling. Okay, so here we in part 1, chapter 1, we get the description of Mr. Morel. Okay, and seeing this, Gertrude fall in love with Mr. Morel, Walter Morel. Okay, but you see that Gertrude Morel was the opposite. That is, she herself was opposite. She had a curious, receptive mind which found much pleasure and amusement in listening to other folk. She was clever in leading folk to talk. She loved ideas and was considered very intellectual. What she liked most of all was an argument on religion or philosophy or politics with some educated man. This she did not often enjoy. So she always had people tell her about themselves, finding her pleasure. So here we see you may be asked, that is, compare and contrast the character of Mr. Morel and Mrs. Morel. Then when you will go through the text, you have to mark those lines of compare and contrast, okay, between the character, that is compare and contrast the character of Mr. Morel and Mrs. Morel. Then Gertrude's blue eyes were very straight, honest and searching. She had the beautiful hands of the Coppards. Her dress was always subdued. She wore dark blue silk with a peculiar silver chain of silver scallops. This and a heavy brooch of twisted gold was her only ornament. She was still perfectly intact, deeply religious and full of beautiful candor. You see, at a Christmas party, they met for the first time, and Walter Morel seemed melted away before her. She was to the miner that thing of mystery and fascination, a lady. Okay, so Gertrude Coppard watched the young miner as he danced, a certain subtle exultation like glamour in his movement, and his face, the flower of his body, ruddy, with tumbled black hair and laughing alike whatever partner he bowed above. Then here we see that Mr. Morel, that is Walter Morel, and Gertrude Morel is the opposite characteristics are opposite. That is, she was Puritan. Okay, we see that Gertrude Morel was Puritan like her father, that is high-minded and really stern. And therefore the dusky golden softness of this man's sensuous flame of life, that is Walter Morel, that flowed off his flesh like the flame from a candle, not baffled and gripped into incandescence by thought and spirit as her life was, seemed to her something wonderful beyond her. That is, you see, the opposite characters of Mr. Morel and Mrs. Morel, though they are opposite, they fall in love, and the next Christmas we see that they were married, and for 3 months she was perfectly happy. Okay, after marriage she was perfectly happy for 3 months, and for 6 months she was very happy. And you will also see that the next Christmas they were married, and then after a year she was pregnant, and she gave birth of their first child, that is first son, William Morel. And my dear students, in this chapter, that is part 1, chapter 1, you see the first quarrel between the Morels centers on Mr. Morel's financial deceit. Okay, he has not paid for the furniture and rents the house in which they live rather than owning it, as Mrs. Morel has been led to believe. Mrs. Morel is constantly at a disadvantage because of her lack of financial independence. And logically, she cannot even upbraid her husband for stealing money from her purse when she is totally dependent on him to give her that money in the first place. In their battles, Morel exploits this position as breadwinner, and Mrs. Morel's essential powerlessness is revealed. That is according to D.S. Lawrence. The description is like that. That is, the house is filthy with you, she cried. Then get out on it. It's mine. Get out on it, he shouted. That is, Walter Morel shouted. It's me as brings the money home, not thee. It's my house, not thine. Then go out on it. Get out on it. Get out on it. And I would, she cried, suddenly shaken into tears of impotence. Ah, wouldn't I have gone long ago, but for those children. So you see the quarrel between Mr. and Mrs. Morel. But despite her poverty, Mrs. Morel will not stoop or to being exploited by the outwork which the other women of her area undertake. She said, that is, you see, that is, I would starve before I would sit down and seam 24 stockings for 2 pence her penny. Okay, there is little that Mrs. Morel can do to change the fundamental condition of her life. Then, my dear students, here we also see in this part, in this chapter, we also see that Walter Morel was a drunkard. Okay, he drank much. There is one day Morel comes home drunk. They fight, and he thrusts her out of the house, locking the door behind her. Morel's drinking expedition to Nottingham has been described by the narrator with sympathy and tolerance, but the corollary of that trip is that his wife has been left with the boredom, tedious anxiety and drudgery of a whole day in the bottoms. So again, her reaction to his drunkenness is one of the contempt and anger, which provoke him to violence. Thrust out into the garden, Mrs. Morel experiences a strange communion with the world outside the house. And from this description, okay, my dear students, here we see the use of nature. That is a three-way of conflict between body, mind and environment. D.S. Lawrence described the situation in this way, that is, the moon was high and magnificent in the August night. Mrs. Morel, sheared with passion, shivered to find herself out there in a great white light that fell cold on her and gave a shock to her inflamed soul. She became aware of something about her. With an effort, she roused herself to see what it was that penetrated her consciousness. The tall white lilies were reeling in the moonlight, and the air was charged with their perfume as with a presence. Mrs. Morel gasped slightly in fear. She touched the big pallid flowers on their petals, then shivered. They seemed to be stretching in the moonlight. She put her hand into one white bean. The gold scarcely showed on her fingers by moonlight. She bent down to look at the beanful of yellow pollen, but it only appeared dusky. Then she drank a deep draught of the scent. It almost made her dizzy. Mrs. Morel leaned on the garden gate, looking out, and she lost herself a while. She did not know what she thought, except for a slight feeling of sickness, and her consciousness in the child herself melted out like sand into the shiny pale air. After a time, the child too melted with her in the mixing pot of moonlight, and she rested with the hills and lilies and houses all swam together in a kind of zone. Okay, my dear students, and she is pregnant with Paul at this point. That is the protagonist of the novel, and the images of the passage recur at two important moments in Paul's life. When we read in chapter 2, that is in chapter 2, when he decides to break off with Miriam, his first love, and again in chapter 13, okay, when he makes love to Clara and violently thrust out and pushed beyond normality, the shelter of the house, the normal common experiences of the community, the individual has to enter into communion with some alienated reality beyond the common, the ordinary, the collective life of the community. Mrs. Morel, in response to these violent discords and contradictions, wants to push her sons beyond the limits of her own life towards something better. Okay, and the impulse to do this is again initially an impulse towards nature, and where she seems to find the peace and tranquility, the resolution of conflict which she craves. And the very closing lines of part 1, chapter 1 is like that. Mrs. Morel knew him too well to look at him. As she unfastened her boots at the mirror, she smiled faintly to see her face all smeared with the yellow dust of lilies. She brushed it off and at last lay down. For some time her mind continued snapping and jetting sparks, but she was asleep before her husband awoke from the first sleep of his drunkenness. So, in chapter 1, part 1, we see the title of chapter 1, that is the early married life of the Morels. So, you see the early married life of the Morels was not satisfactory, and that's all about part 1, chapter 1. Now, my dear students, I want to give you a homework from our today's discussion, that is write down please homework. Make a list. Question number 1, make a list of major characters and minor characters of the novel Sons and Lovers by D.S. Lawrence. Okay, list of major characters and minor characters. Then you have to write down a critical appreciation of part 1, chapter 1 of the novel Sons and Lovers. Okay, question number 2, write a critical appreciation of part 1, chapter 1 of the novel. And you may try to write short notes on John Field. Okay, and after completing the text, completing the our full discussion, I will give you some other short notes, that is write short notes on Gertrude Morel, Walter Morel, Paul Morel, Clara Doyes. Okay, in this way all of the major characters and minor characters you have to make short notes. And but students, no more today. In our next class we'll go through chapter 2, that is part 1, chapter 2 and chapter 3. Okay, we'll try to complete it. So you will read the text at home, please. Part 1, chapter 2 and 3. You will read the text by yourself at home. It's also your homework. So my dear students, see you again in our next class. Be happy, be healthy, peace. Okay, try to stay at home, don't go out without any essential purpose. Stay safe stay home. Okay, stay home, stay safe. See you again in our next class. Allah Hafiz.